Cole, Mom said I can play with the sword today. What are you doing? What are you doing?
The best way I can explain Evoland is to call it an experience. It is a video game where the gameplay is lifted straight from classic role-playing games, and while it plays like a normal RPG, it feels more like a playable documentary on the advancements that role-playing games have made throughout history. Let me show you more of what I mean. When you first start the game, all you see is a row of pixels that look like trees, chests, and your character. The only thing you can do is move right towards a chest, which opens, unlocking the ability to move left toward another chest. It doesn't start out as much, but within the first minutes of gameplay, you have 4-directional movement with scrolling screens. As you progress, you unlock monsters, the ability to fight the monsters, color graphics, better graphics, and so on. These small and seemingly insignificant evolutions continue to happen throughout the game as the game progresses. At the beginning of the game plays similar to that of an NES game like Zelda. It progresses to more of a Super Nintendo-like RPG akin to Final Fantasy, and by the end of the game, it feels as if you're playing a PS1 era RPG. It does cover a lot in between all of that as well, but those are the major eras that the game covers in the gameplay. When you initially unlock the ability to fight back against the monsters, the game plays practically identical to The Legend of Zelda on the NES. You've got yourself a sword, so you're not alone, and you can stick it straight out in front of you just like Link does, hopefully with some creature on the receiving end. Not much else to it. The next major upgrade is moving freely, without being confined to 4 directions. This improves combat by allowing you to swing your sword and hit a bit more rather than just poking it out in front of you. By now, you should have save points as well, which are a huge help. If you die, you can continue right where you last saved. It is really fast to get right back into the fight as well, with minuscule load times. Continuing through the game, the next form of combat you learn is turn-based. It feels like Final Fantasy in that you have a time limit that must fill up in order for you to attack. The game keeps evolving graphically from here, but those 2 forms of combat are basically all you do for the remainder of the game. When you get to the point where you can have turn-based combat, you have probably played the game for roughly 10 minutes, and that's being a bit generous. This is one of my issues with the game. Everything evolves so fast that after playing 10 minutes, you've already unlocked the 2 main forms of combat that you'll be using for the entire rest of the game, save for a few spots. This problem really isn't all that bad when looking at it objectively, but I can't help but think that they could have done something a little bit different here. Even something as simple as delaying the turn-based combat from coming into play until about halfway through the game. Eventually, you unlock 3D mode, which plays exactly the same as 2D mode, but looks different. There are some clever things done with this though. Changing the perspective of objects helps you pass objects that you couldn't when you were flat. This actually brings up probably my favorite part of the whole game, which was the time stone puzzles. These puzzles are pretty simple, but they make use of the perspective changing that I just mentioned. The way they work is if you hit one of the time stones, you change from 3D to 2D, and vice versa. I really enjoyed this not just because it was a form of time travel, but because this is one of the only parts of the game that made me think. I legitimately got confused at some of the puzzles, and when I did finally solve them, I felt pretty darn good about myself. Another reason the time stones were such a great idea was so that the developers of the game could continue to make use of all of that really nice sprite work they made for the game. Without this, they would have done a lot of work for players to only see it for about 30 to 40 minutes of gameplay. I thought the pixel art looked really nice, especially because as the game evolved, you were able to see different interpretations of the same art in different styles. The game's main focus really is about how early RPGs have changed over the years. The art style really does a fantastic job of reflecting that. The story found in the game also reflects that. As you go through the evolutions, not only does the graphics and gameplay change, but so does the story. Now is the part of the video that I bring up spoilers, but in all honesty, you're really not playing this game for the story. Anyway, here is the timestamp. Feel free to jump to it if you want to stay away from spoilers. In typical 80s and 90s RPG fashion, the story is as follows. Save the girl, save the town, and then save the world. You could even think of this as an evolution of things to save. Moving on. After you get the controls down for both forms of combat, you meet up with Kairis. Up until this point, your character doesn't have a name, but when you meet Kairis, you are able to name your character. I went with the default and stuck with Clink. Kairis tells Clink that her town is in trouble and needs help. She says that they have to do something about some crystal. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure what it was. Clink and Kairis journey through some caves fighting monsters and eventually making their way to the crystal that unlocks 3D mode. After unlocking 3D, you make your way to Kairis' village and learn about something bad going on in the Dark Tower. When you're there, you meet the main bad guy, Zephyros. While playing, I was convinced that I could beat him, and I tried my best to strategize properly to win, but alas, in typical RPG fashion, you don't end up winning to progress the story. Not only do you not win, but Kairis actually dies. This really caught me off guard. In hindsight, I really should have been able to read the signs. Not only has this been a pretty predictable story, but the bad guy's name is Zephyros, and Clink has a big sword. So yeah, of course the happy-go-lucky healer girl dies in the main character's arms. After Kairis dies, Clink gets powered up and takes out Zephyros for the time being, who then escapes to a big tree. You make your way to the big tree, and while there you have a different kind of a fight compared to the typical turn-based ones you've been doing up until now. This fight feels like if Zelda Ocarina of Time was made for the PS1. I'm sure that the PS1 could play Ocarina, but it just has that PS1 feel that you really can't explain. And to solidify the fact that it's like Ocarina, you even play Energy Ball Tennis. Honestly, this wasn't my favorite fight of the game. It was rough, the controls weren't the best, and it felt very janky, but this really drove home that PS1 feel. Overall, this game was pretty fun. I loved the small upgrades that the game got as I progressed. Most of the time, they would be accompanied by some witty text, which was always a treat. I was disappointed by the amount of evolutions in the late game compared to the early game, but it does make sense because even today as games release each year, there's little to improve compared to the very early days of gaming. Evoland was a fun experience. I enjoyed my time with it, and I'm glad it wasn't too much longer. This truly is a game for fans of gaming. You will get way more out of it if you enjoy gaming and its history. If you want to play it, don't go in expecting an incredible RPG, go in expecting a charming journey through the history of RPGs. Thank you guys for watching the video. Hope you guys have all enjoyed it. I really did like Evoland. It was a lot of fun. And if you want to know more about how I liked the game, you can head over to our gaming channel where I am uploading my little Let's Play I did of the game. I think it's about 8 episodes long. The first episode should go up with this video, so feel free to jump on in and see what I thought about it as I kept playing the game. There are some mess ups, some angry Coles because of puzzles and stuff, so it'll be a treat. Go check it out. Thanks again, everybody, and as always, keep it rad.